Welcome to Sober Dad Crew, the podcast where we talk about all things sobriety, recovery, parenting, music, tattoos, work, and more. For more information, please visit soberdadcrew.com. All right, on this episode, I have Rae and Ollie from the only podcast that matters, where they talk about punk rock. It's a pretty new podcast, and I've just totally binged it and totally loved it. And they talked about being sober on that podcast. And I said, let's do something fun, get away from these crusty gray-haired dads that I normally talk to, get some cool young people on here and talk about punk rock and podcasting and sobriety.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Excited for this. It's fun to talk about sobriety.
Yeah. So can you each just take a couple minutes or seconds and introduce yourselves, and then we will really kick into high gear.
Yeah, sure. Me. I'm Rae. I'm 33. I've been a little bit in and out of sobriety throughout the years, but I'm at 2.5 years right now, which is by far my longest streak. No plans to go back. Obviously, I'm very into punk rock. I make music. I make kind of any kind of art I can get my hands on. And that's my thing. Just making art.
Awesome.
Yeah.
My name is Ollie. I'm 36. I've been sober. I just hit my 6-month mark, which is awesome. It felt really good to get to that milestone. Sobriety is definitely a big part of my life right now, as is this. Rae and I have been friends for a really long time. We were friends through our years of active use, and we've become even closer now that we're both in sobriety. We've always shared this love of punk rock and music.
Yeah.
And we're just really doing something with it now and really enjoying ourselves.
Yeah. Something productive. Yeah.
All right. Let's jump into right away a little bit kind of your backgrounds and your sober story. I just say whatever kind of degrees you're both comfortable in talking about it, but kind of what was the journey that led you to making that sober decision?
Our journey is interesting because, like Ollie said, we were in active addiction together. We met when we were both really partying. We were not in touch so much when we got sober separately at different points in our lives. And then we met up again after we were both very serious about our sobriety and started this kind of second chapter. But when we met through the music scene in Providence throughout the years, but we became close in 2020. And we were both like taking Adderall during the day and then drinking. And then after the drinking started, inevitably there would be like other drug use, and it would lead to like Coke and whatever. And we were doing this more days of the week than not. It was like very much just automatic behavior for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And then 2.5 years ago, I hit a kind of breaking point with my mental health. I have some disorders, and I was in a really bad place with depression. And I reached a point where I just had the worst night of my life, and I just kind of purged something. And I woke up and I was like, I just had that breaking point that a lot of addicts talk about having, where it's just kind of the sky opens up and you're like, it's gotta be over. And I felt like I had just come as close to the brink as I could. And so that was about 2.5 years ago for me. And then we were out of touch during that period. Ollie was out of town.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, my story is like, between being a musician and being a chef, I loved both of those things because they came with drinking and drug use, and I loved that I had permission to get effed up on the job and to go on stage.
Surrounded by enablers.
Yeah. Surrounded by enablers.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Those are pirate ships right there.
Yeah. Yes.
Restaurant kitchens are notorious for kind of, as long as you can get your job done, you can do whatever the fuck you want, and I love that. And, and so that became, it went from being a small part of my life to being my entire life.
It's so normalized. And I'm also a server, so I work in restaurants. So in the restaurant industry and in the music industry, and especially the kind of music, the rock and roll and the punk rock that we're into, it is just so you don't even talk about it. You all do these drugs. Everybody does one or more of these drugs, and it's mostly amphetamines and uppers and stuff that I'm used to being around, but other stuff too in the scene. But it's like, it's noteworthy if you don't do that stuff. Like, we stand out as sober people. It is so normalized in the music scene and the bar scene. And it's surprising to people that you turn down Coke or turn down a beer. When I started getting sober, I knew like one other sober person in the scene. it was the two of us, and it was my bandmate, and it was the two of us against the world. So you don't think it's weird. You don't think what you're doing is extreme. In hindsight, it's such extreme behavior. And it's so risky, and there's fentanyl and everything. And but in the moment, you don't feel like you're taking a risk because it's just so how it goes with everybody around you. It's so typical that that's how your night is going to go.
The community that we were in was just full of, everybody was just doing the same behavior. It didn't feel out of place. It felt, it took me a long time to realize that I had problematic behavior.
Yeah.
And it took me another 4 years to stop. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, my story does include some jail time, which really was the final straw. That was my bottom. And I just decided enough was enough, and it took a couple tries. I've been trying to get sober for about 1.5 years now. And so it took a couple tries, a couple stumbles, and, I feel like I'm in a good place now, and I feel comfortable. Rae has been such a strong supporter for me through this time because she's got a little bit more experience and some little bit of time.
I never doubted that you were going to do it. I was always like, there are people who talk a big game and they don't. And I was like, you're going to get there. I always knew you. I just know who you are as a person. I know the willpower you have, and I know that you can be stubborn in a good way. And I was like, you're gonna get there.
I appreciate it.
I know Ollie's qualities that it does require kind of a stubbornness to quit something that has control over you. And I was like, I know you can commit to things. And so I'm not surprised he made it this far. I was very much like, it's happening, and the relapse isn't necessarily starting at zero. This is part of it. And like, I was seeing it as progress the whole time because I was so confident you were going to get here, Yeah. I mean, I believe in you.
It's nice to have somebody be a cheerleader, and Rae has always been that person for me. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think someone having your back, right, is just huge. I mean, my wife and I, we met as sober people, so that's so foundational in that relationship. But having, and I talk about on this show all the time, community
yes,
is huge. Like, I didn't do a program. My wife did a program. Like, there's no right way to do it.
Yeah.
It's the way that works for you. You're like, there's people will throw shade on NA beverages, and some people, NA beverages are like
every day,
100%.
It helps me not have a real beer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know Dave Haas? Do you know that musician?
No.
He was the singer for the Loved Ones. So he's in that sort of the genre I think of as the children of Bruce Springsteen and the Clash. So like Gaslight, those kind of bands.
Great.
So we went to I interviewed him, and so I knew he was a sober dad, and he was like having his NA Guinness during the show. And I was thinking when you were talking about restaurants, because I sort of have this traditional kind of office job, but like, not like Adderall in the workplace, but people still will, like, on a Friday crack open the beers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, offer me stuff. And I'm not like, I don't hide like the fact that I'm sober at work. Like, it's a thing, and I'm proud of it. I think it makes me better at all the things I do. Better dad, better partner, better employee, all those things. But people, like, I literally will have someone like slide a wine bottle toward me. I'm like, really? Have I not been crystal fucking clear on the topic at hand? And another like funny thing that happened. So in our building, there's a bar space, and it's been a couple of different bars, and a new one opened up in there. And so we went over, like, as an office, no big deal at the end of the day. And I just said to the bartender, I said, can I see your NA menu? And she said, we don't have one. She made me a very delicious NA drink, but I thought, this was last year. This is fucking 2024.
Yeah.
It's a dumb business decision.
Yeah. You're missing out on a huge demographic.
Yeah. The guy I interviewed who owns the Empty Bottle in Chicago said his first year with the full NA menu to supplement the others, his NA growth was 600%.
I believe that. Yeah.
And that's like scary business growth.
It's a trend. And when I started 2.5 years ago, and I had done a stint on and off for a year before that. And then for a couple of years, I sort of just gave up on sobriety before I was like, that was right. And during that time, I didn't know anyone in our music scene. I didn't know any artists. I didn't know anyone in the restaurant industry that's sober. And now every month, one of our friends, now this Providence music scene, we used to really stick out like sore thumbs. Every month, one of our friends is sober. And Gen Z is not as big of drinkers as millennials. And it's become almost trendy to do NA drinks. And to me, it's like some people act like it's not hardcore. Like, oh, what I like about drinks is the alcohol. And I'm like, hey, if this Corona NA is helping me not have a real beer, what's the hang up there? What's the problem? It's getting the job done, and like different people require different tools. Yeah. And I get sick of drinking water all day. Like
and that's one of the things for me. For me, it's more of a celebratory thing. When I went out with my girlfriend for a birthday dinner, I had an NA beer, and I was like, man, I feel like I'm celebrating.
Do you know what's very interesting about me too is like if you spend 15 years associating, you open a beer at the end of the day, you take the edge off, the fun part of your day begins. When you open a beer and it doesn't have alcohol, your brain still thinks you're cracking open the thing. You have the glass bottle. Your brain associates it with chilling out and your day being over and starting to relax. And like they literally help me relax. Like at the end of a long shift, the people at my bartender will be like, hey, do you want an NA Stella? And I'm like, yes, I want a shift drink. Everybody wants a shift drink. I want a shift drink too. Like just because it doesn't have alcohol doesn't mean it doesn't serve a purpose as a fun part of the night. And so if it's effective and it doesn't have alcohol, I'm on board. Yeah. Like it has helped me in times where I wish I had a Pacifico. I had an NA beer and it got me through that urge. And like, to me, that's good. To me, that's good news.
Almost tastes like a party.
Yeah. Yeah, it works. And mocktails have come a long way. And actually, my brother started off in the restaurant scene with Ollie in Providence, and he's at Michelin restaurants in Chicago. And a lot of these places that do tasting menus do like wine pairings and stuff. And they've all started to do NA pairings with their, 8-course menus. These 2-star Michelin restaurants have started doing NA pairings. Like it's a thing now. Thank God.
Yeah.
If you look for it.
Yeah. And it's like, I like a good meal, and I'm still surprised there's another, instance at one of probably the best restaurants in Ithaca, like a $65 entree kind of thing. And I asked and they're like, well, we have Pepsi products. I'm like, really? Like
it's
you
so
have a
interesting.
50-page wine menu.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And you can't, it boggles my mind.
There's actually like good NA wines now too. Like there's good NA spirits. There's anything. My dad gets this brand AF, alcohol free, and they're like canned Palomas and vodkas. They have like a burn to them. It's you're just not doing the addiction thing, but the flavor is all there. Like there's really no reason to not. My dad's not sober. He just enjoys these when he doesn't want to drink but wants a drink. Like they're just a good option for anyone, really.
And for me, as somebody who I was a chef, obviously, and like I would really valued wine pairings, and I valued the experience of drinking wine with dinner. And that's something that I miss, and I've talked about missing that, but that's not something that needs to be not part of my life anymore.
No, it's just just looks different. Yeah. So many times people think they're giving things up in sobriety, and I'm like, it's gonna look different and probably better. It's not going to be exactly the thing you're giving up. Like my experience, I still go to the dive bar and I drink the non-alcoholic beer and I don't do shots, and it's different. It's a better time. You have to adjust. You have to use different tools. You have to give certain things up, but like you don't have to lose everything. You have to like use some skills to make it work. But you don't have to like never do a wine pairing ever again. Right. Thank God the year we're in, we have more options, but even mocktails, anything, like you just have to understand it's worth the change. Yeah. You have to commit to it. And like I always say, like sobriety is only as fun as you make it. It can be better for you. It can be healthier, but it's not going to be fun unless you make it fun. And that's a way you can do it. You can get creative. And especially you having such a knowledge for like palates, coming up with a mocktail is probably like a fun challenge. Right. That can be like rewarding. And you can be like, wow, I made this great product. Yeah. So you just have to like, you just have to go in it with the right mindset. You have to make it fun for yourself. And I think that's a lot of what these NA drinks can do for people. And amongst other ways you can make it fun. I think that's a huge thing for people who are like nervous about giving that part of it up.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people like alcohol as part of their identity, and like it's hard to give up your identity. And it's like you're just switching it up. We're just making it safer and healthier.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And there's some weird professional optics. Like I go to galas, which does not seem very punk rock because it's not. But got to pay the mortgage and feed the kids. But some people are self-conscious about being known to be sober. I mean, I have a professional contact, and she, just called me, and she's just not out, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, "Wow, what you're doing is really cool." And and I don't judge. That's her own decision, and you have to make your own choice. But for me,
Absolutely.
just being out there and being sort of out loud and showing people that addiction looks really different than what people want to say it does. I'm not the guy on the corner of the street. That is real. But I'm 54 and I have 4 kids, and I'm, married and like hold a job and all these things. But I'm also someone that struggled with mental
Mhm.
health and struggled with using alcohol as a medicine to try and, manage my mental health.
Yeah.
Epic fail. For the record, if people
Yeah.
haven't figured it out from the podcast, it does
Yeah.
not work
Sometimes we have to do
particularly
the
well.
research ourselves, right? Unfortunately.
Yeah. It is not a long-term healthcare strategy, alcohol.
No.
It will take you down. And you see it in people who are my age who just kind of even don't go super heavy. Maybe they ease up, but man, you can just see it. They just look old.
Yeah.
You guys are just babies.
I feel younger than ever. Yeah,
right?
I do.
Don't you feel good and you have energy in the morning?
I started being sober, I felt younger when I turned 30 than I did when I was 29, because it's like I have my whole life ahead of me now. I didn't have my life ahead of me before. I didn't think I was still going to be here. I was in a really bad place, and I've always been an open book about my mental illnesses. And so I very easily became an open book about my sobriety, just sort of how I am, as I like to share so other people feel like they can share. But literally, I felt the older I'm getting, the more I'm going into my 30s, I feel younger every day. I mean, I'm in the prime of my life every day, and it's sobriety. That wasn't going to happen without sobriety. I was not on that track. There's no version of me that exists today that's this happy, still relying on alcohol.
Yeah,
it made me feel good for the 3 hours at the end of the night that we were partying. And then the other 21 hours of the day, I was as unhappy as I imagine anyone could ever be. I was so checked out, and it felt so hopeless, and it was so dark. And like, it's ridiculous to me now that I was trying everything else to not be depressed, and I wasn't giving up drugs and alcohol. That was the big one.
And the big thing, so my wife is a therapist, and the other thing is, if you're on an antidepressant,
oh yeah,
and you're drinking, the fucking antidepressant doesn't work.
Yeah, isn't that interesting I was taking my meds?
But
yeah,
my doctor never told me that.
No.
True, yeah.
There's a lot of information people don't get about their medication. And I mean, silly things like, well, this isn't very silly, but a lot of people aren't aware that certain antipsychotics, you're prone to like heat stroke and stuff. And so in the summer, I'm like, doctors don't tell you could have heat stroke on this antidepressant and you got to drink more water and stay in the shade. Like, there's a lot of information about these meds I'm on that I learned on my own. And I studied psychology for a while in school. And I'm like, I knew you weren't supposed to mix it. I thought that was because it was like physically dangerous. I didn't know it was because the med wouldn't be effective without it. I thought I thought it was going to make me loopier or get more drunk or something, which I was like, let's go.
Let's go.
Save a little money.
I like that.
Yeah. I was like, that's awesome.
That's very telling that we all had that thought.
Yeah.
Sign me up.
Yeah, that's when you're like, ooh, saving money on a couple of beers tonight. Yeah. I wasn't told why not to mix it. I wasn't told that they weren't working. And I was like, I take my meds every day. And was like, not really. Haven't taken them in years in that way. Haven't taken anything that worked in years. And then I was sober for a year and I was still struggling. And then the month I hit my 1 year of sobriety, I became so happy, and I have been happy ever since. And I feel like I don't even have bad days. It did take a little while. I didn't quit and become happy. It took a year of sobriety where I was still learning how to be sober and stuff. But like, it's so crazy that I was like, why am I so depressed? And like, certainly it's not the cocaine, Adderall, and alcohol cycle I'm in 24/7.
Couldn't be.
couldn't be that. That wasn't even on the table to give up for a while.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I have a relatively new doctor, so I'll be 15 years sober next month, and it's the first
That's
doctor
amazing.
that checks in with me on my sobriety. I just had an appointment,
Yeah.
and my mom has been in the hospital and all this stuff. She's like, "How's your sobriety?"
Wow.
I'm like, Heather, it's dope. Like, I'm never ever tempted. Like, we've had some hard stuff in the last year with family health and all that. We moved my mom into memory care, and I'm like, thank God I'm clear of head.
Yes.
Right.
Because then I'm clear of heart. And that was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can't imagine like going home and then numbing myself.
Yeah.
Like I can't, it's not even a thing anymore.
No, once you develop the skills, it sounds unappealing. It sounds like I would not have a good time, and it's hard to remember. It's like, oh, it was chemically fun, I guess. There was a rush and you were taking the edge off. But Ollie and I were talking about it. Like, the longer you're sober, the more you don't want to restart that clock. And the longer you're sober, the more it starts to feel ridiculous. It feels like a ridiculous option to me now. Like, if I had a bad day and I went and I'm going to go make my day worse, like, why would I do that? But it was so automatic. It was not even thought about. It was like, that's going to be the only time I feel good all day. I'll be depressed all day, and at least I'll have fun at night. And now I'm like, why would I make my day worse with drugs and alcohol and then wake up tomorrow feeling worse? Like, it sounds like a laughable option to me now.
Yeah. You know what's funny? I think about the time when we were using together. And I don't remember that many happy times. Like, in retrospect,
no, we had fun, but we weren't happy.
There was a lot of you and I comforting each other because we were both so effing sad.
We were really depressed. Yeah. And it was like me, you, and my brother would sort of take turns being the one who, that night that we would have fun for a couple of hours. And then there was a point in the night where it would turn. Yeah, it would just turn in the fun. We had fun, but we weren't happy. Yeah, exactly. And I would rather be happy and a little bit boring than have fun and be very unhappy. And by the way, I still do have fun. Yeah. But I was mistaking the fact that the end of the night, when you are on your way to pick up, when you first do it for the first night, when you crack open your first beer, you buy a bottle of tequila, like, just not even doing it yet, just buying the thing, you start to feel like you're having fun. And that's just the addiction. But we were not having real fun. Our brains were it was just some chemicals. Like, we weren't happy people. And we're closer than ever now too, because we're both actual, like, full people who can process our emotions. And we've always been kind to each other, but it just feels so much like gentler and more like our relationship is it was never bad. We've always been close and we've always been very good to each other, but a whole other level when you're using your whole brain and your whole heart. Yeah,
right? Like, you probably wouldn't have started your podcast. Right.
We talk about that all the time. We'll do things like, especially in the scene where everyone's in a band, you'll be like, oh, we got to start a band, and you'll come up with a name for it. And then you'll be like, yeah, we're going to do a band one day. And then 9 out of 10 of these bands don't happen. And we were talking like a couple of years ago, or if we were still using, we would be like, oh, we're going to do a podcast. And we'd be like, oh, save that for the podcast. And it would come up every night, but we would have never sat down. We would never downloaded the software and bought the mics and set up and sat there and taken notes. I would read all the time, but I wasn't going to take notes, and we would never sit here and record it and publish it. Yeah. It would be a thing we talked about for years as if we were going to do one day. Like, how many bands do you have with people that you have never been in the same room outside of the bar? Like, I've got 10 bands. I could tell you the names of these bands, and
they're probably good names.
They're great. I'm good at naming bands, I gotta say. I have a Riot Girl band called Born Hater with our friend Scarlett. That's a great name for a Riot Girl band, but it's not going to happen because we made that up at the bar.
Yeah. It's like being on a treadmill, right? You don't, or maybe at least treadmill makes you healthy, but it's just, I don't know, you're stapling yourself to the wall. I don't know what it is, but you just, or you don't even remember the idea.
No, right.
my wife and I say, like, we never would have worked if we had met when we were drinking.
Well, I've never been in a relationship that worked when me and another person were drinking.
Yeah, right.
I've only been in a relationship. I've never been in a relationship sober. I haven't really been interested in this chapter of my life, but every relationship I've been in, either I was drinking and using, or I and the other person were both doing it, and it never went well, surprisingly. In hindsight, it's like nobody was able to like be happy or process their emotions individually. It was always codependent. It was never healthy. And like, I'm not very interested in having a relationship at this point in my life, but I do know it would be much better if I decided to do that. I know that I would be in a better place to be a better partner and pick a better partner.
Yeah, right.
I can pick a better partner now than I could have back then. My standards were not very high.
Well, the decisions were usually made at 1:30 in the morning.
Yeah. And sometimes you didn't really make them. Yeah. You sometimes were like, well, I guess
it's you.
I guess it's right. It wasn't necessarily very thought out. It sort of would just happen. And now I'm like, oh man, I would pick such a better partner if I ever am interested in dating again. I have such better confidence to see the red flags and walk away from them than I was able to when I was in active addiction. And I was really just concerned with like who I liked. And now I have crushes on people and be like, I would never date that person. I have a huge crush on them, but I would never date that person. It's a terrible idea. And in the past, crush equals
dating.
Want you. And it was just not thought out. And I have so much structure in my life. I'm so protective of my free time. I don't want to babysit someone ever again. I don't want someone to feel like they're in control of me ever again. Like, I just have these standards now that were not there when I was using. I've never been in a healthy relationship when I was drinking. Yeah. Have you ever felt like you were in like a relationship in active addiction that was healthy?
It was usually me hiding things from them if they were not as big of a active user as me, or it was us fighting all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever been in a relationship except for the one that I'm in now, where I was fully honest with somebody. Because I was hiding all my use and the behavior around it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like when you find that, it's pretty great. Or when you decide I don't actually need this external gratification, right? Because there's a lot of that. And even when people come out of sort of active substance abuse, they'll date like crazy, have sex like crazy. I'm like, okay, you're not actually, you've sort of transferred some of that.
Replacing the feeling with a feeling.
Yes, yeah.
Your Adderall to a booty call.
Yes, absolutely.
Good song title.
Yes.
Yeah, I know, right?
We have a band. We'll do that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's interesting. I got so good. I always needed a lot of space, but I also needed somebody there when I needed them. And I got so good at being alone, and I enjoy my own company so much. Like, there's not a lot of people I would rather hang out with than me. So it's hard for me to date because I'm like, tonight I would have a better time reading and hanging out with my pets than I would going on a date with this person. I just enjoy my own company more. And so my stands are just so much higher.
Right.
Before I would need to be alone out of like being overstimulated. And then I would need that affection right when I wanted it. I would also need this person to be available. And I didn't want to ever go a night without seeing them or a whole day without seeing them. And like, I was just, I needed like the validation, but it was a codependency. It was like distraction from how bad I felt, or just something that it was almost like using a drug in itself, that it was a sort of chemical hit to be with this person and whatever. It is dopamine, right? And now I'm like, you got to be pretty cool for me. I'm busy. I'm really busy. You got to be awesome for me to make time in my schedule. I got a lot going on.
I love that.
You know, thank you. Yeah. I'm like, man, what am I gonna make room for? I love everything in my life.
Yeah, liking yourself is kind of cool. I remember this moment where I was like, oh, I like this guy. He's like kind of goofy, and he's like, I was like, oh, it's me. Like, sort of like I found who I was again, and that feeling is pretty great. And I don't think I'll ever forget sort of that moment, because that's so pivotal to be like, why would I ever like turn the other way?
Yeah.
Like,
absolutely.
I've been through enough now that's been hard that I'm like, I don't worry. You know, like, my oldest is 21. Like, when he was in high school, we lost a friend of his to suicide. Like, navigated those things. I mean, I met my wife and all the good things that have come.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't even blink at it. I can be around it. I can go to shows. Thank God I can go to shows, but I always sort of did. I was like, I can't not go see music. That's because it saves me. Like music for me is like going to church.
Mm-hmm.
Was a 12-step program part of your recovery?
It wasn't. I just stopped, which, as I do point out, if people are really heavy alcohol users, just stopping is not necessarily the best medical choice. Getting some help is good.
You need some medical assistance with that.
Yeah, I kind of just stopped, and I did a bunch of therapy. I had a great therapist who called me on my shit. I'd go in and joke around. Yeah. She'd be like, no, none of that.
Yeah.
So like that was really, helpful to me.
Yeah. Ollie and I went about it differently because Ollie has done the program. I stopped for 4 months. And then I had this night that was one of the worst nights of my lives. And then I stopped since then. But I did it out of sort of making a decision. I felt like there was no turning back. Like it didn't feel like an option anymore. It was just off the table after this very terrible night of just being as low as I had ever felt in my life. So we have different experiences. We have the different end of the spectrum where I went to meetings here and there along the way really to try to meet sober people, but not for the program. Whereas you've used the program and go to meetings for the sake of being a part of the program.
It feels like sometimes, you mentioned community before, right? And so that's a big part of it for me is having a community of people that I feel accepted in. The other thing is like it literally feels like taking medicine sometimes when I'm in a bad place and just in a funk, not thinking about using, just in a really bad place in a funk. I go to a meeting and I walk out feeling like $1 million because I heard something that reminded me why I'm doing this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So let's circle back to the podcast a little bit. So what's the origin story?
So Ollie and I were both involved in the music scene, and we both were kind of nerds for music. And the first time we were ever alone together, he came into my apartment and he saw this giant Clash poster, and we realized both of our favorite band was The Clash, which is not as common as I think it is because it's my favorite band. I think a lot of people would have that. But we started to realize like most people, their number one band isn't usually The Clash, even if they like them. And we were nerds for this. We refer to the members of The Clash by their first name.
Yeah, like they're friends of ours.
Yeah, like if Ollie says Mick, I know he's talking about Mick Jones and not Mick Jagger. Yeah. I know what Mick he's talking about. Like it was such a part of our friendship. And I've always read a lot. And for years, I've mostly read nonfiction about bands I like, which is mostly punk bands. And we would just sort of nerd out over this. Yeah. And then I started to have this idea a couple of years ago. I think I was sober when I came up with the idea of wanting a podcast one day because I was sitting at the bar and I was reading a whole book on the New York Dolls. And I like to talk and I like to joke around. And like I thought a podcast would suit my personality. And I was doing all of this reading and I was like, I would love to do something with all of this knowledge. And it's a niche topic, but it's one of those things that people like it. They really like it. And I always wanted to do this podcast and I would post on Instagram, oh, when I do this episode one day, I'm going to do this. And I didn't know who to do it with. I didn't have any idea. I knew I didn't want to do it alone. I knew I wanted someone to joke around with and bounce off of. And I didn't want to just sit there with a microphone. And then Ollie was sort of the perfect co-host in terms of our personalities, our passion, and our taste. But we had been in different places because I had been sober and he wasn't even in town. You were still in active addiction and you weren't in Rhode Island. And then when he comes home and he gets sober and like he's like serious about it and I can see he's doing it, now we are like really the perfect co-host together. Like the sobriety was the missing piece for us to both be ready to really like treat, and we treat this like a part-time job. I mean, the hours we put in and the structure we give it, like we really went into this taking it seriously. But yeah, it was an idea. It was an idea I knew I wanted to do one day, but I didn't know if I was going to do it in a year or 10 years. I knew it was something I wanted to try at some point. And I had a couple ideas for co-hosts, but no one was really perfect. And then when you really were sticking with sobriety, it was like we were just both ready to go. And like,
well, for me, it's a creative outlet, and I haven't had one in the last couple of years, especially not when I was at the end of my active use. And for me, I need a creative outlet. I need something to pour my creativity into. I know you feel the same.
Yeah.
This is something that feels like a very grown-up version of things that we used to do, which was a little bit more DIY punk rock in the music.
Yeah, we used to make music once in a while, but we never finished anything, of course.
Exactly.
Except the band name.
Yeah, we had a band name, and we have one song on Spotify that Ollie mixed for 6 months before he put it out. It was because Adderall makes you think you can perfect everything. Yeah. I need a project, and so I like working on music. I grew up being a writer. I like to paint, I like photography, but right now I like that this is something where I've spent years doing my research, and I can do something where I'm like knowledgeable, and it's appealing to me that people who like this can learn from all the years I've invested in learning, and I find it fun to learn. But a lot of people don't want to sit down and read 300 pages about the New York Dolls. So we try to do it in a fun way. And my favorite part of it is that I'm doing it with Ollie, because we make each other laugh a lot.
Yeah.
And we're very patient with each other. And we have this deal that we'll never, if it stops being fun, it's over. We're just going to do it as long as it's fun. But there was a point where we thought we had to pump the brakes for a minute, and that Ollie couldn't do it for a little while. And I was like, I don't want to do it without you. I didn't want to do it with somebody else. I didn't want to do it alone. Like, my favorite part is how much we make each other laugh and how excited we get about sharing facts. Like, we're like, oh my God, did you know this thing? Texting each other. We are nerds. Yeah. We are nerds for punk rock.
And
I think that's what resonated when I started listening. I was like, oh, I know these people without knowing these people. Because also The Clash is my favorite band. But I also read a ton about all kinds of music. And I'm like, I should just have gotten a PhD in like music history or something.
That's how I feel too. Yeah.
But I didn't, and you can't make any money doing this shit anyway. You got to just do it because you love it.
Yeah.
But we all want a sponsor. So like if someone wants to give us a lot of money, we'll take it. I mean, I'm speaking for you guys, but I'll take the money.
Absolutely.
But I'm still going to say fuck on the podcast.
Yeah, that's my rule too. Like, don't pay me if I can't say fuck. Yeah.
Right.
You can
also, one thing I like is your politics because, well, they're punk, but I've had people unfollow me because of my politics and talking about capitalism and that Black Lives Matter and we need to support trans people. And I'm like, screw you.
Yeah.
This is me. This is
said
my
very
thing.
early on. Yeah. We're like, we're going to be ourselves. That was before we filmed our first episode. We're going to be ourselves, down to talking about astrology. Like, a lot of people who are into punk are the kind of guys who roll their eyes at astrology. Like, we're going to talk about it because we like it. And we're going to talk about our politics. I will ruin the vibe. I'll be like, hey, that was a transphobic joke. I'll ruin the family party. I'm going to be myself. I believe in these causes. I believe that I can explain it to people in a way that they can understand. I have the patience to like have that conversation and educate someone. And I'm on the podcast and I'm like, these are my beliefs. Free Palestine. And that's what The Clash would have said. And like, if that makes you unfollow me, that's fine. I would also be happy to have the conversation. I would also be happy to sit down and like, I have a friend that I've spent 6 months hanging out with that doesn't really agree on a lot of these topics with me. And we sit down and we talk about it. And like, he usually kind of comes around and he challenges me to be able to support what I'm saying and back myself up and whatever. But if you are going to unfollow me because Black Lives Matter, you're not punk and this probably isn't the place for you, like, that's okay. I'm not interested in like pandering for a wider audience. I'm interested in being authentic, even if that means we have less listeners. I've never been interested in being not authentic at all, for better or for worse. And I'm not for everybody because of that. And I'm fine with that.
But that is okay.
Yeah.
I mean, my 13-year-old daughter, we keep telling her that. It's like, you don't have to please these other fucking people. I pull up to school. I'm like, most of the people in there are not worthy of you giving a shit what they think.
Mm-hmm. That's a hard lesson to learn at 13.
Well, I've started to realize, I don't like everyone. So why would I expect or want everyone to like me? B, I don't care what they think. Really, like, do I really care what they think? Not really. If you stop and think about somebody in particular who doesn't like you, had this issue at work like a year ago. There was this guy who I wanted to be friends with, and he thought I was the most annoying person ever. And I was like, yeah, maybe, but I'm also cool. Like I'm a lot, but that's not a bad thing. And he was not having it. And then I realized, I'm like, he's a snob. Like, I don't like him.
Yeah, why do I
And
like
that's
you like
fine.
that?
And then we kind of just coexisted, and I stopped trying. And I was like, it was so freeing to be like, wait, I like my personality more than I like his personality. Actually, I would rather be the annoying one who makes people laugh than the one who's being mean.
Too cool for school.
Yeah, very much too cool for school. And so like I started to be like, if you really think about someone, do you really care what they think? And if they like you, it's usually someone you care about.
Yeah.
And if they don't like you, it's usually someone that, if you really think about what you think of them, you're like, we could just not like each other.
Yeah.
It's mutual. It's fine. I don't stress out about it. I don't stress out about like making stuff that's good. I'm so much more concerned in like being happy and having fun and maybe having a smaller audience. And that's punk rock. That's why punk rock is a little bit niche.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's not for everybody. I think that goes hand in hand. It's like you stand up for stuff and maybe you're loud and chaotic and like you're not going to be on the radio if you're, in the Stooges, but like being authentic is so much more important to me, I think. And sobriety does allow you to do that more too, because you can express yourself better.
But I think it's harder for women, especially. I mean, this is, a misogynistic, racist, capitalist, oppressive system. I mean, let's just go there. Yep. And so watching my daughters like navigate that is harder than watching my sons navigate
it's the double standards are crazy. And like, especially in this punk world, we talked about it in the first episode, but the way men treat me when I'm in a band t-shirt versus the way men treat Ollie or my brother when they're in the same band t-shirts, it's so belittling. It's so demeaning. They challenge me. They act like I don't know what I'm talking about. They think I'm stupid. They think I bought it at Urban Outfitters and that I'm a poser. And they act like I have to step up and prove myself.
And the joke's on them because Rae is the most knowledgeable person that I know.
I school them. I'm like, if you want to. And usually it ends up being a regrettable decision for them. But also, so what if I just liked the t-shirt? Also, people can just wear the t-shirt, and that's, you don't get to talk down to them because it's a girl in a t-shirt. And I experience microaggressions in the patriarchy every day as a woman, and I'm hyper aware of it because I've spent so much time educating myself on this. But especially in the punk world, it's men have been so mean to me, and so belittling in a way that they aren't to other men in this world. And it's a struggle of mine to be like, that's not punk rock of you. If you really want to think about the characteristics of what punks are standing up for, being exclusive and being part of the patriarchy and being like, that's not what punk is about at all. It's for all the freaks and weirdos to come together, for us to bond over music. It's for us to be bad at stuff and maybe not know our shit. And like, to stand up to this patriarchy and this capitalistic society. You being sexist is not punk rock at all. But I'm so aware of being a woman all the time in a patriarchy. It's one of my biggest passions, is like trying to destroy the patriarchy one man at a time by educating people around me.
You're going to be busy this year.
Oh yeah. I run into them everywhere. I wear a lot of shirts that signal my feminism too. I wear a lot of shirts that like, I support men's right to shut the fuck up or like dump him or whatever. So I walk around inviting the conversations, and I'm ready to have them. And I'm fine. I'm fine to have the conversations. I'm fine to give my analogies when somebody says not all men. I'm ready to give them my little story about explaining to them why that's not an effective thing to say. Like, I'm ready to have these conversations. But because of that, I have these conversations every day. These conversations at the restaurant I work at with my coworkers and customers. I have it at the dive bar. That's pretty liberal dive bar, but still has people in it. Like, I have these conversations at the gas station sometimes. Like, if you're going to fight it, it's a little bit exhausting, but you're right. Like, watching your daughters grow up in this society, it's not good for men either. I don't think the patriarchy benefits any of us. I don't think it's kind to men either, but it's scary and exhausting being a woman in a way that like is all encompassing. It's everywhere. It's every microaggression. So like, I can't even imagine. I can't imagine raising daughters. Like, they would be so stressed out all the time because it's a tough world for women.
It is. You know the band Warriors?
Yeah, I actually just came upon them this week for the first time.
So the song Yes All Cops. Right? It's the same
Absolutely.
thing. Yes, all men,
Yes.
especially white heterosexual men. Yes.
Yeah.
Right? Like that, you're not immune from it. So like with the male children, like trying to raise men who aren't assholes is like of primary importance to me. You know, I was just thinking about when you're talking too about like Kathleen Hanna talking about from Bikini Kill, if people don't know, you know, who she is, talking about sound guys fucking up the sound at their shows. I'm like, why would you do that? Like,
she has a great quote that she's like, I would rather be the obnoxious feminist than be complicit in my own dehumanization. And that's me. I'm like, you can find me annoying. You can think I'm so radical. I think a patriarchy is extreme. I think what I want is pretty neutral. And I think compared to the patriarchy, it's extreme. I think living in a patriarchy is a really crazy thing for us to have as a system. Like, I think that's extreme. And so compared to that, I seem like I'm so wacky. But I think I'm asking for like equality for all genders, sexualities, and races. I think that's normal.
Yeah, that seems valid.
That doesn't seem extreme to me. Yeah. But I'm happy. I'm happy to be the obnoxious feminist. I'm happy for people to think I'm like wacko and that I'm so far left that I'm not even like, that's fine. I don't want to be complicit in my dehumanization. Like, she nailed it. I love that quote. And I just found it like 2 weeks ago.
That was really good.
It's a really good quote.
And I have to say, like, as somebody who's in your life as a friend, like, I enjoy when somebody challenges Rae. I'm like, here you go. She's just like, she's very intelligent.
I'm like cracking my knuckles. So I'm like warming up.
And like,
Ollie sits back and opens an NA beer and
he starts filming.
Exactly. I don't know a single man who can outmaneuver you in the conversation.
I am a nerd. If I'm passionate about something, I'm reading about it. And so I'm passionate about global politics. I'm passionate about feminism. I'm passionate about punk rock. So if I care about something, I'm just a learner. I was good in school. I'm a good student. I could read a 600-page book about a topic and it could be the driest book ever, but I want the knowledge, so I will read it. And so I try to be as well informed as I can. And I try not to yell at people if I can't back myself up. And when people say not all men, I'm like, I got something that I could break down for a first grader. If you want to sit here and listen, like, I have a very simple analogy.
Could be too advanced for some.
It will sometimes, if it doesn't click, I'm like, I don't know how to go lower. Sometimes if it doesn't work, I'm like, that's kind of all I got. But I try not to preach anything if I can't back myself up.
Yeah, that's true.
And like, I'm not just yelling something because I feel like it or I saw it on Instagram. I try to be well informed. And sometimes I'm not. Like, sometimes people challenge me and I got to go do the research. And like, sometimes, Good. Sometimes I'm like, I don't actually have an answer for why I think that. And then I will go home and look into it. Yeah, well, and we'll have the talk again next week. Like, sometimes I don't know. I know what I believe, but I don't know why I believe it. And then I go home and I look into it, and then I'm like, okay, like there's facts there's numbers, there's studies that back up, you know, this.
That's so interesting. If more people thought that way, I know what I believe, but why do I believe this? If more people sought out the answer to that question,
like, how are you gonna back yourself up?
We would live in a different society.
Yeah. I think it requires putting your ego aside a little bit and going like, I don't have the answer to that. I mean, like, I don't know the answer. I'll get back to you. And you can be wrong. Like, you can be wrong sometimes. Like, I also don't think I'm right all the time. I think, like, I believe what I believe very passionately, but I don't think anyone's ever right all the time, including me. There's no way I'm the one exception to that rule.
Right.
It would be like crazy. And so, like, you have to have these conversations and be able to say you're wrong, be able to say I don't know. But I also feel very confident about the things I am, because I've really done research, and I'll research from the other side. I have debates with people who believe different things than me, and I listen. Like, that's important. But because I feel very well informed, I do feel very confident about my beliefs. Like, I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure I'm right about. I think I'm right about feminism. But yeah, but you have to be able to listen. You have to be able to admit when you don't know. in order to be effective in those conversations. People aren't going to listen to you if you don't listen to them.
Yeah.
And I think like a lot of people on both sides of the political spectrum lead with like ranting. And I'm like, if you think there could be education on sensitivity training on that side, do you think maybe there could be some education on sensitivity training on our side? Do you want like reform in education and things on the right, but you think we have it all perfectly nailed on the left? Like, I think there's probably room for learning how to communicate on both sides. That would be a little bit more effective. Yep. That being said, sometimes I'll go off on a man. That being said, that's what I like to do, but sometimes I do get pushed to the point of maybe kind of doing a little slam dunk.
That's okay. That's fair.
But for the most part, I try to keep in mind that like I can be wrong. I think that's more effective. But yeah, we're pretty unapologetic about our beliefs. And we decided that day one. We decided that going into this.
Yeah. I want to circle back to punk rock because I have a theory. And I was listening to your Joe Strummer episode. And if I am remembering correctly, you both said you were 14 years old when you discovered the Clash. Yes. I too, many years before you, was 14 years old when I discovered the Clash.
Perfect age.
It's 14, the gateway age to punk rock.
Absolutely. I think most people I know, it was 8th or 9th grade. You are starting to be not restless because you're a kid, or restless because you're forming an identity, or maybe for the first time in your life becoming gradually aware of the world around you outside of yourself. You're not fully, formed, aware person.
You're dying to be independent at that age. You're starting to form your own personality.
Absolutely.
Away from your parents, away from your friends even sometimes.
And also
having somebody that is like speaking truth to things that you are feeling is huge.
It's also the age where being cool is the most important it's ever been. Right. That's when you get into Tony Hawk Pro Skater. Mm-hmm. That's what you get into snowboard. Like that's when you're 14, like being cool is more essential to that. I think especially for boys, honestly, we're raised in a culture where like it's geared towards boys like skating and getting into punk. But for me, like I was into it anyway, I guess, but maybe it wasn't like geared towards me so much. But I think that's an age where like I got into it because it was cool. I got into it because there was a boy I liked who liked punk. And I was like, he's so cool. I want to be cool. I'm going to go buy a Clash CD. And then it changed my life. He wore a Misfits shirt. And I was like, I'm going to go check out the Misfits because it's cool. I think he's cool. I don't think he was particularly funny or smart or charming. Like I liked him because he was cool and I wanted to be cool. Yeah. And like punk's cool. We talk about that in our first episode. It's okay. It's okay to just like it because it's cool. That's valid. Like that's a great reason to like something. And I think sometimes people act like they're effortlessly cool or they happen to be cool. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
And I'm like, oh no, I try to be cool. And so I put a lot of effort into being cool. It works most of the time, but like I wasn't cool by nature. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm a nerd. We've talked about this. I'm a nerd. But they dressed cool. The music was cool. It was loud and fast. It was edgy. It was being different in a way that wasn't like being bullied, because I always felt very different. And I always felt like I have always felt like a very unique person, and I've never felt like a follower. And this is a way you could be unique in a way where you could like own it and be in control of it. And not because you were outcast and you weren't popular. You'd be not popular by choice because you were punk. You weren't popular. I'm punk and I don't want to be popular. I want to be different on purpose. And it's such an interesting age where you're like, you're starting to become a teenager. You're starting to form an identity. And like the surface level of punk, before I found out it actually was good music, when I thought it was bad music, I liked it even though I thought it was bad. And then at some point I was like, this is very good. But it was just such a shock from what I was raised on Van Morrison and Marvin Gaye. Right. The Sex Pistols were a lot for me at first. But yeah, like I think it's this age where it's like, it's so much about identity, and punk is so much about identity. There's some genres that are just all encompassing to like a lifestyle and a personality more than other music genres. And this was like, it was something that I could just latch onto and run with and own and be different in a way I was control of. And I think everyone I know got into punk at 14.
Yeah, I mean, it felt unique to me at the time, like you said. It made me feel like an individual, and it just felt good to turn up "Death or Glory" really loud and piss off my mom.
That's my current
Although,
favorite.
to be fair, my mom got me to the Clash. Different story.
When I first met your mom, she's like, London Calling is a great album to raise kids on. And I was like, I'm never going to parent, but if I do, I'm calling you for tips and tricks,
Yeah.
like for sure. That was so cool of her.
She's very cool.
Yeah, I think it's an age where like a lot of my friends and I went in different directions. A lot of my elementary and middle school friends and I went in different directions at that age, at the end of 8th grade, going into 9th grade. There's people who like became extremely into being theater kids.
Right.
There's people that went really hard into cheerleading. Like, I think it's an age where like you need an identity and you like lean into it. And that was just the one I picked.
Thank God we picked that one.
Cool. Very cool.
And I think it's carried me, like I'm 54, right? Like I feel like I'm still like, I'm gray haired and old, but I'm still this punk guy, right?
Yeah.
I feel like it makes me better at what I do. The DIY ethic is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
The lens on the world is really important. That kind of, I don't necessarily give a shit what you think is important.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to learn to balance that because, you know,
yeah,
you got bosses and you got those things and you have to. But that is like at 14, it's like, do I want to just fit in and go with the crowd? Or do I want to kind of forge my own way? And I always joke with my kids, I'm like, don't ever tell me everyone's doing it. Because that is like gasoline to me. I'm like, that is the reason not to do something. Fuck all those other people. If you tell me, but everybody, I'm like, that is the wrong answer.
I also always say, I mean, it's true that being into punk rock is why we're able to like do this podcast the way we do, because it's all very DIY. And if we didn't have the ability to make music and make stuff in a DIY, every time I've made music, it's just so DIY. I've never been in a studio. I've never played on stage. It's just in my living room or whatever. And like we've behind the scenes here, we've got sheets as curtains to block out light. We've got pieces of paper on the lamps to diffuse the light from the lamps. Like it's a very punk rock studio in here behind the scenes. And I also have always said being sober is the most punk rock thing I've ever done.
100%.
And I think having that like drive and that ability to be different and that ability to like face reality and kind of like grit your teeth and go for it in a way that like I had always applied to politics. I had always applied to making stuff. But being sober, like I am never checking out. I am never getting high to feel good. I am dealing with reality and the world completely face forward with nothing but myself 24/7. I am never taking the easy way out. I'm never having a good day because I had a drink or smoked a joint or did a line or whatever. And I think like to sit here and deal with the world we live in and find joy in spite of it. And my favorite band right now, Idols, is very good at this, but finding joy as an act of resistance, finding joy in spite of the capitalism and the patriarchy and the genocides, and doing that sober and never relying on a substance to chemically walk you into a good mood, but doing that from your own place on your own, that's very punk rock.
Yeah.
And I've told people since I quit drinking, being sober is the most punk thing I've ever, and I thought like being in a band and using and drinking was punk rock because a lot of the punk scene revolves around drugs. But just because it's common in the punk scene doesn't mean it's punk.
Yeah.
By like punk ethos.
Well, a lot of people equate punk rock with like not caring about things for some reason.
Right.
A lot of people do, right? I mean, you know, they're like, oh, anarchy. It's like, no, that's not really how it was going.
Yeah, anarchy, but with a moral compass, by the way.
Yeah.
So I just saw this Joe Strummer interview the other day where he's like, I'm not promoting revolution. I'm promoting individual thought, and thinking for yourself is the hardest thing that you're going to do in your life.
Absolutely.
And getting into sobriety, like we mentioned, was something that was not going with the flow.
No, yeah.
It was some, it was breaking away from the crowd.
Yeah.
So
and we had to give up that scene for a little while. And then like I'm coming back and I'm doing this project I care about more than anything else ever. But yeah, like I there are people who like call it California sober, which I have a hard time using the word sober for that, but however it looks to you, like I don't mean to judge, but I'm like to me, like giving up alcohol is great. And if that's what's important to you, I'm glad you're doing that. And if like weed isn't an issue to you or whatever, but to me, what's punk about sobriety is like never checking out, never just relying on something else to make you feel good. And like, it's hard and it requires work. And it requires like your raw personality. You have to give it everything you have. You have to do it like against the grain, against what society is doing, against this hustle culture and the grind and all of this stuff that's really against being a woman in a patriarchy. I think like you have to have that core value of being able to like say, fuck it, I'm doing this. Fuck it, I'm going to stand out. And like, it's not like you have to be punk rock ethos to get sober, but it certainly helps.
It does help.
And it is sort of punk rock by nature. Like, I'm going to say, if you're sober, hell yeah, you're punk rock.
Put on the Clash. I also think, the people in power would like nothing more than a bunch of people who are drunk and high and not
absolutely.
challenging the capitalist system that's keeping them down.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I mean, you cannot discount that role in the politics that we're living in right now.
Absolutely.
And so it is an act of rebellion.
It is. And I never judge anyone as an individual for drinking or using, because I remember why I did it and I remember why it worked in the short term and I remember why it felt good. So I don't judge that. But as a society, it's insane that alcohol is not only legal, but the center of all social interactions. Like it's wild to me that alcohol that is a poison, like the reason you have an acquired taste is because it tastes bad to us because our body's like, don't drink it. It's poison.
Because it's killing you.
It's literally, it's like deer that don't like certain berries because the deer aren't like, well, I'm going to eat these berries anyway. Like it's very weird of us to drink alcohol. And it's the center of everything, like housewarming parties, going to the bar, work parties where you're with your coworkers, going to the beach. People bring beer to the beach during the day, picnics, like everywhere you go, everything you do, there's cafes that start to turn into wine bars at 5:00. Like everywhere you go, alcohol is the center of community for us. And I'm like, that's just a crazy thing for us to collectively do as a society. That's wild. We're just getting inebriated and like killing brain cells and drinking poison. And you can't go anywhere where that's not present.
Yeah. They call us the crazy ones.
And I'm crazy. I just think it's a like, if you step back and you build a society from scratch and if you take away the fact that you've grown up with alcohol being legal your whole life and you've grown up in a patriarchy your whole life, like these are very wild things to be in society. It's very insane if you started at something neutral where there wasn't really drug use and anything to begin with. And we're like, yeah, like cocaine is illegal. And you're like, that makes sense. Alcohol is legal. And I'm like, walk me through that one. Like, it's just strange to me. Yeah. The further you get away from it. Of course, I didn't feel that way when I was drinking. Right. When I was drinking, I was like, this makes a lot of sense.
Agreed. Okay, to wrap up, let's do a little musical round robin.
Okay.
So what each of us is a good OG gateway punk album or band?
Interesting.
I feel like we can't pick the Clash for this.
Yeah, we would both automatically pick London Calling, so I think we have to say something. Okay, I think it's a perfect album. It's punk, but it's also other things. It's palatable, and it's a critically acclaimed album. So, like, if we take the most obvious answer to most people off the table, and we take London Calling off the table, like what would be my next pick? It's interesting. I have to think about that.
Right, so just real quick to clarify, this is one that was for us or one that we would recommend?
I think recommend or band. We can do band because the album can be hard.
So for me, like my next logical step from the Clash now would be the Buzzcocks.
I knew you were going to say that
because they have so much pop sensibility. They have the subject matter is a little bit easier to digest.
So you're thinking about being like palatable and accessible?
Yeah, for like a gateway, because it's a gateway.
Yeah, it's a gateway. Okay, because yeah. Okay, as something interesting, I have a hard time picking this one. I'm trying to think of like my favorite bands right now.
Well, I think yours would be a Ramones album, or no?
I would say the Ramones is very palatable and fun and is also super punk. My first thought was to go to the Clash's first album, the self-titled, because if I had to define punk for someone and they had never heard that word before, I'm like, that whole album, that's a punk album. But I guess if you're thinking about what's going to get somebody interested, there's a reason the Ramones are more of a household name than, the New York Dolls. The Ramones have a lot of bops and short songs, and they're super catchy, and they're appealing to everyone. They have a Phil Spector album.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I would have to go to like maybe the Ramones' greatest hits because all their hits are good. That's a band where all their hits are good. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go with that for sure.
I mean, I was leaning like Bad Religion for the political side of it.
Okay, yeah.
That maybe is not totally the friendliest for everyone, but they're pretty. I mean, I feel like it's a pretty accessible sound.
We both like it, but we like punk.
I mean, those are the bands that I was listening to in middle school and high school, were the sort of, I guess, is that second wave punk or is that third wave? I don't even know. But those were the bands like Rancid and
Rancid was
good band. Yeah,
Rancid was my first punk show. NoFX opened up for Rancid. That was the first time I was in a mosh pit with all these like big sweaty dudes, and I was like 14 and very tiny. I was like elbowing my way out of there because I thought I was going to die at a Rancid show.
So I think that second wave punk has a lot of value because it brings you into the world. And then you can kind of go back and listen to the OG stuff.
I also think it's interesting that a lot of new wave bands and goth bands were punk earlier on before new wave and goth. Like the Cure's first album is super punk. And people think of them as sort of like, he's like the godfather of goth, but his early stuff, some of Blondie's stuff is pop, but some of Blondie's earlier stuff is new wave. Talking Heads, same. So I also think like, I would say to somebody like, listen to new wave. Maybe start with the Talking Heads and Blondie and stuff like that. And then new wave bleeds into punk. It was all the same scene. And like, you can sort of walk yourself into punk from there if you're somebody who finds it incredibly abrasive. If you're somebody that doesn't like the Sex Pistols because it sounds like noise to you, I think like I would walk them through a couple of new wave bands and sort of dip their toes in, which I literally just did for somebody. If like
only you could have like Punk 101 and Intro to Punk as a college class, you would kill it.
I would be a really good professor for that. Yeah. Well, I love giving out homework.
There might be, Cornell might have it, because that's like, so Greg Graffin from Bad Religion lives in Ithaca, which is near me, and he does teach at Cornell. Mostly like he's like a PhD in some science thing or something, but he has done like seminars on punk up there on those fancy hills. All right, cool. Last one, new band or recent band.
Favorite or that you would get someone into?
Favorite or I don't know. I'll throw out Mannequin Pussy because I fucking love that band.
Hell yeah. And my favorite current day band is Idols, like hands down for me.
A new one that I've been really getting into is Fontaines DC.
Yeah, you did get into that recently.
They're a really good band.
Yeah.
And they kind of bridge a lot of, there's some new wave, there's some punk, there's, if you don't, because you also we don't want to limit people, right? Like there's some great, like the new Cure album is fucking beautiful.
It's so good.
So good. Oh my God. But right, also don't limit. There's a lot of great stuff out there that doesn't necessarily like get fit.
I would say like if you're not into punk, I would start you with Viagra Boys because I think they're great songwriters. They're kind of funny. They're chill. They're a little bit more low key in some of their stuff. But like my favorite band, like I think Idols does everything a punk band. They are political. They are joyful in the face of adversity. They are like so loud and so aggressive and so hardcore, but the songwriting is really good. The playing is good. The vocals are like, it's like when The Clash does something that is a well-written album without losing its punk edge. And to me, like Idols checks all the boxes. They look cool. Their music's cool. They have a message. They're super political. Idols has lost a lot of followers speaking up on a lot of issues. And turns out they still make a career doing it. So I guess we don't need those people to be successful. But I think Viagra Boys is a little bit more accessible to somebody who like is starting out. Do you like Viagra Boys? Yeah.
All right. And before we finish up, just tell the people where they can find you.
We're on YouTube and on Spotify at The Only Podcast That Matters, all written out. Those are our two main platforms right now. We're not on Apple Podcasts yet, but we are kind of headed. We're getting that way.
Yeah, we're on Instagram as The Only Podcast That Matters. The full name is also our Gmail. On Instagram, I'm being like a little bit more interactive, and I try to post some stuff that like engages the audience. I have fun on social media. I find social media to be a very fun place for me. So if you're on there, I think we're kind of a fun follow.
Yeah.
And we do little clips and stuff on there. But yeah, mainly our full episodes are on Spotify and YouTube.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was super fun.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for listening. Sober Dad Crew is a DIY project by Stephen Kimball, who writes, edits, and produces the show. To support the show, please review it where you listen to podcasts or visit soberdadcrew.com to buy some merchandise or make a donation.